In the mid-16th century, a long-running conflict between two of the most powerful world religions is building up to a climactic battle in the Mediterranean for the very soul of Europe.
On the smallest island in the Mediterranean, a clash of civilizations occurred in 1565. You had Europeans, Asians, and Africans clashing together for the two most important religions of the Mediterranean, Christianity and Islam.
Facing each other are two highly trained forces. The Knights of the Order of St. John, a small but formidable Christian military order, and the Muslim Janissaries, the fearsome crack troops of the Sultan.
The Janissaries did have a very exalted notion of being God's soldiers, fighting for the Sultan and for Allah.
All the military orders were notoriously ruthless when it came to fighting non-Christians.
We look at the siege of Malta through the eyes of Hassan, a Christian boy press-ganged in Greece, raised by Turkish farmers, converted to Islam, and trained to be an elite Janissary soldier. His arch-rival is Raymond, a young French noble sent to the Order of St. John by his ambitious parents to become a prestigious knight. Both will meet again, fighting in the name of God and Allah. In the 16th century, two-thirds of the Mediterranean, the lands around the Black Sea, the Balkans, and the Middle East, are part of a growing Muslim empire, encroaching on the heartland of Christian Europe.
The Mediterranean in the 16th century was becoming a lake shared by the Ottomans and the Spanish. Then, in the middle of all this, bang in the middle, you had the Order of St. John.
The Catholic Habsburg Empire, led by the King of Spain, was the main opponent to the Ottomans. Charles V gave Malta as a naval base to the Order of St. John. After a disastrous sea battle, Raymond, a knight of the order, has been captured by the Janissaries and has had his head shaven to mark him out as a galley slave. He must row hour after hour on a diet of dry bread and beans or face severe punishment.
The Knights of St. John knew that there was a risk that you could become a slave. You prayed to the gods that you were going to be released. Some of the greatest grandmasters, some of the greatest Knights of St. John actually became slaves of the Ottoman Empire.
After years of training and fighting, Hassan has become a Janissary officer. His fatherly mentor, the Janissary dervish chaplain, initiates his protégé into the Muslim Bektashi faith. A small number of dervish lodges survive in modern-day Turkey.
One of the reasons in choosing Bektashism for the Janissary army might be their Christian origins. Bektash is known as more tolerant worshippers, and it was easier for the newly converts from Christianity to adapt to their practices and belief systems.
After years of ransom negotiations with the Ottomans, Maria, a wealthy widow, has finally freed Raymond from his life as a galley slave.
Usually, the order of St. John was actually paying for their release. And if you did manage to escape and come back to Christendom, the most important thing was to get your own back and sail out again and steal more slaves.
Maria welcomes a merchant from Algiers.
Ne parli con questo?
Raymond resents Maria doing business with the Muslim trader, who's travelling on a special permit.
We have the issue of these safe conducts from both sides of the great religions. From the Muslim side, documents permitted a seafarer who was a Christian or who was a Jew to travel in enemy territory. There needed to be an exchange of redeemed slaves.
The merchant offers a generous ransom for an Ottoman governor captured by one of Maria's ships.
This would be given as a safe passage to a Christian traveler. It's very important to notice that this is the cipher of the reigning Ottoman Sultan. Here you have the representation of the three continents where the Ottomans had territory in, Europe, Asia and Africa. And you have this S sign, which means that the wind always blows from the east to the west for the Ottoman Navy, because it is always going against the infidel.
Slaves!
Maria suggests a joint business venture. She reveals her plans for a tavern in the harbour of Birgu.
Qu'est-ce que tu fais?
An interesting contract which I came across is the ransoming of Muslim captives, and in this agreement he is agreeing with his master that he will pay this amount of money to free himself. The slave is agreeing that he will run a tavern for his master and that the profits will be shared. We always think of a holy war from both sides, but trade needed to flourish.
The Grand Master's Palace is one of the grandest buildings commissioned by the Order in Malta.
In front of the Grand Master's Palace, you have the Piazza San Giorgio, where was the old slave market of the Order. Every household in Malta had slaves. Slaves were running businesses. Slaves were building fortresses. Slaves were used on the galleys as oarsmen. Slaves could be sold abroad. So slavery was one of the motors of Maltese economy.
In 1565, one of the largest fleets the Mediterranean has ever seen is assembling in Constantinople.
Yeneceğiz. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
The Order's naval raids were a thorn in the side of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. When news reaches his palace that the knights have captured two of his governors and a 101-year-old family nurse, Suleiman is forced to act.
Suleiman was fuming at how the Order was treating his subjects. He had let the Order surrender with full military honors in Rhodes, and they had sworn not to attack his ships again. Obviously, they broke that immediately. By 1565, he had had enough. He wanted to show no mercy.
Not far from the Sultan's palace, over 200 ships are loaded with soldiers, horses, and artillery, ready to annihilate the Knights of Malta.
You have to remember that the idea of the crusade had not gone from the minds and the fears
of the Muslim peoples and rulers of the Middle East. It was a relatively recent memory. Above all, it was the fear of this potential military base for a future crusade. That was what really frightened the Ottoman Sultan.
The Ottomans set off on a 50-day journey. En route, they pick up gunpowder, cannonballs, food and soldiers from all over the empire. It's a massive operation that only the Ottomans are capable of.
Suleiman the Magnificent needed to pull a lot of strings to make this happen. He had a huge, vast empire, and to get 30,000 men together, you needed to get troops from one side of the empire to the other. Those troops needed to be fed. You also needed gunpowder, you needed the bronze for the cannons. It was a logistical nightmare, but Malta had to be taken.
On the way to Malta, the expedition's commander, Mustafa Pasha, reminds his officers of the Sultan's ruthless orders.
Siz Tanrı'nın askerleri sizsiniz. Bu sefer açmak yok.
This was a fierce battle, and there was not going to be any quarter given from either side.
The time has come. Raymond must face his enemies once again.
The Order of St. John knew that an attack was coming. They had spies in Constantinople. All the knights around Europe got a letter from the Grand Master, come to the aid of the convent. We need every man we can get in Malta. Mercenaries, adventurers from all over Europe were flocking into Malta, getting ready for the fight. And the tercios, the best troops that the Spaniards had, would augment the military force that the Order and the Maltese had.
During the siege preparations, Grand Master de Valette solicits help from the Order's extensive network.
Being a professed knight did not mean that you had to continue fighting. Yeah, you could retire into your homelands. Exception was Malta was attacked by other forces. This happened 4 or 5 times. This was called a call to convent. All knights in Europe, if not too old or feeble, were returning to the convent and preparing for an eventual fight.
From Scandinavia to the Mediterranean, the Order of St. John's commanderies hurriedly send money, soldiers and arms. The knights gather in Sicily, responding to their Grand Master's call. After the arrival of the Muslim fleet, Raymond's militiamen are called up.
The Knights of St. John found a system in Malta that every man who could bear arms, so 16 upwards, had to do military service. Now suddenly, this militia became a standing army to protect the island, and they were getting training every week on a Sunday. After you go to Mass, you go to training to use the arquebus, the sword, and the shield.
Raymond orders his militia to burn fields and villages.
The Grand Master gave the orders that the wheat would be cut beforehand in May and brought into Birgu. The old and the infirm and the women had to be taken to Sicily for safety.
Prepárate.
Whilst other women and children flee Malta, Maria is determined to stay, to be close to Raymond. Commander Mustafa Pasha is incensed by the scorched earth tactics of the knights. The arrival of the Ottoman fleet is memorialized on the walls of the Grand Master's palace. The murals were created by Matteo Perez de Leccio, who spoke to many veterans before he painted his historically accurate account of the Great Siege of Malta. The Ottoman forces land at Marsaschlock and set up camp around the forts of the Grand Harbour. Hassan surveys the barren landscape. They must push for quick victory. His men are dependent on the island's limited resources for food and water.
Normally, with traditional sieges, it's the defenders who are going to get starved out, and the people who are surrounding them control the countryside and therefore have access to food. The Siege of Malta was a bit different because the Ottoman army were also dependent on food being brought to them by ship. Both armies could, in a way, outstarve each other and win.
Hassan discovers that the wells have been poisoned with animal carcasses. A big setback for his troops.
Takip et.
Bunları buldum.
Kampa geri dönüyoruz.
Hassan's officer has only managed to round up a few Christian deserters to join their forces. There are few Maltese civilians left to dig trenches or serve in the Ottoman army. The Grand Master and his knights are holed up in the island's forts with their troops.
Grandmaster La Valette was a warrior, a leader of men who was going to fight till the last.
On the eve of battle, Grandmaster de Valette gives a stirring address to his knights.
Combattiamo per la santa cristianità, per il nostro padrone, San Giovanni. Siete tutti I soldati di Dio.
De Valette as a ruler was an authoritarian. You know that he didn't like the Maltese very much.
When the Maltese actually spoke up against the order and tried to get better rights, he just chopped the head off of the Maltese who wanted this and put his head on a pike in St. Angelo.
De Valette needs to place himself in a position as ruler to ensure that his orders are followed.
After de Valette's speech, an impassioned Raymond volunteers to defend the vital fort of St. Elmo. Built by the knights, Fort St. Elmo guards the entry to the Grand Harbour. Whoever holds the fort holds the key to the island.
The volunteers that actually went to St. Elmo were knights and the Maltese militia. These were the bravest, the staunchest knights and soldiers that there were on the island. Anybody who went to St. Elmo knew that he would either die in the name of the faith or survive and become a hero.
Raymond is touched by Maria's selfless decision to stand by him during the siege. He hands her poison in the event of capture and enslavement. The Order's Grand Harbour is held by 500 knights, 1,800 Spanish and Italian soldiers, and 3,000 Maltese militia. But they're up against 30,000 Ottomans, including 6,000 elite Janissary soldiers. Fort St Elmo is manned by only 50 knights, backed up by 500 Spanish and Maltese troops.
The Grand Harbour was protected by the knights with various things. Fortifications, very good artillery, and there was a huge chain made out of metal that would actually block the entrance of the harbour. To make this chain, you needed a lot of skills. To cast the metal imported from places like Venice, but you needed a lot of manpower to take the chain out or take it back.
Hassan targets a Christian position to cover his engineers who are building trenches and gun batteries. After days of bitter fighting, Raymond and his militia are on guard duty.
Being in a fort surrounded by sharpshooters was psychological warfare. You are constantly in fear of being shot at. If you are a defender, you have to put your head above the wall because you need to see where the enemy is coming from. You need to see if the enemy is putting countermines or charges that would explode and destroy your fort.
Raymond is frustrated by his untried soldiers.
The Janissaries did have the latest weapons in the world. We know that they were one of the earliest armies that used musketeers during the conquests.
The Ottoman armies were equipped with some of the best weapons that there were. Long-range shooting, snipers, their arquebus were top-notch.
Raymond is determined to take revenge. Under the cover of morning fog, Raymond leads his men on a sortie against Hassan's snipers. But then, Hassan's Janissaries reinforce their position. Raymond and Hassan confront each other again. The Christians retreat.
Faith played a very important part in motivating the Maltese. The Maltese had a long tradition of being the lords of the frontier against the Muslims in North Africa. Also the fact that their loved ones might fall prey and be victims. They might become slaves to the Ottomans. That was a great fear.
With their cannons in position, the Ottomans bombard St. Elmo day and night. The fort's walls are beginning to crumble.
In St. Elmo, the defenders knew that they were in for a tough fight. They were being bombarded, they were being shot at. If you see the cannonballs that the Ottomans were firing, these were huge marble stone balls that were battering against the bastions. But the Knights of St. John and the Maltese knew that if they held their position, they could buy time.
The small but strategically important St. Elmo, opposite the Knights' headquarters of Fort Sant'Angelo, protects the harbours of Birgu and Sanglia. Hassan spots suspicious activity at the base of the fort. The Ottoman batteries prevent the Christians from resupplying the fort by boat. But Maltese swimmers keep lines of supply and communication open with the Grand Master. Hassan orders an attack.
There were Maltese who had gotten tired of the knights who were always too aloof and ruling over them with an iron fist. So we have a Maltese man who's below the bastions shouting, "Don't stay with the knights do not treat you well. I'm eating all your grapes from your fields in Marsa." And this Maltese, Paolo Miccio, is shouting back, "I will be paid in your blood." The Maltese, on the Ottoman side, shouts back, "I'll find you, you dog, and when we come into Sanglia, and I'll kill you all." And Paolo Miccio calls back, "Find me where the fighting is the thickest. I will be holding my sword and my shield, fighting for my country, my religion, and for my order."
Signore.
Maria receives dreadful news. St. Elmo has been cut off from all supplies. She fears for Raymond. Desperate, Maria considers taking the poison. She doesn't want to live without the man she loves. Instead, she sacrifices their beloved dog to help save dwindling food and drink supplies, as ordered by the Grand Master. Grand Master de Valette is writing to his ambassadors to lobby the rulers of Europe for urgent support.
Being a kind of international institution, the order needs persons always being in contact with the rulers. Every important court in Europe, there was installed chargé d'affaires, a person who's running the business and the lobbyism for the order.
Since the Order of St. John arrived in Malta, Fort Sant'Angelo has been their headquarters. The Knights of Malta today are a sovereign state without land. They even issue their own passports. The Order has many embassies around the world. and they have a seat on UN agencies such as the Atomic Commission in Vienna. They've always prided themselves on their work as Good Samaritans.
When the order started to emerge in the 12th, 13th century, it was a brotherhood of friars. The main saint of the institution is St. John the Baptist, and this reminds us of the old vocation of the order to support pilgrims, to be there for the sick and the poor, to run hospitals.
The Holy Infirmary in Valletta was built by the Knights in the 16th century. Their hospital treated everyone from monarchs to slaves for free.
The Order of St. John is globally running hospitals, vigilance services. And one of the most important duties of the Order is still to be present as a kind of face of Europe that takes care about situations which go wrong, where there's war, despair, hunger, refugees, and so on.
After 3 weeks of relentless bombardment, St. Elmo's outlying fortifications are overrun. Wave after wave of attacks have left most defenders injured or dead. As the battle persists, Grand Master de Valette uses Fort St. Elmo to frustrate the invasion force.
Mustafa Pasha was certainly not on the same level in terms of experience like Valette. Maybe the biggest mistake of his was not to have captured Medina.
The fortified town of Medina, in the center of Malta, is close to the supply lines of the Ottomans. Under cover of darkness, the Medina cavalry enter the Ottoman camp.
Morale was getting lower and lower by the day because it was hot. They were far away from home. There was no food. There was dysentery.
The Janissaries mourn their comrades killed in the raid. One of Hassan's officers has had enough. Hassan is enraged that his men are not focused on their duty.
It was regarded as the biggest disgrace if their cauldron were stolen or demolished by their enemies. Once a Janissary regiment turns over the cauldron, it means that they reject this generosity of the Sultan, of their commander.
From the embattled fort, Raymond writes a farewell letter to his beloved Maria, to be sent with one of the last messengers to get out.
Mio carissimo Angelo Maria, sono pronto a morire. Spero che rimarrò sempre nel tuo cuore come l'indomabile soldato di Dio.
Por favor, Envía esto a nuestro gran maestro.
The knights seek permission to retreat so they can live to fight another day.
The last phase of the siege, Fort St. Elmo could not be relieved by other forces, and no one could escape. Insofar, who was there to the end.
De Valette responds by appealing to his men's honor.
Votre pétition pour quitter son terme a été accordée. Ce soir, vous pouvez ramener les bateaux. Rentrez, mes frères, au couvent, chez vous à Birgo, où vous serez plus en sécurité. Je serai plus rassuré quand je saurai que la forteresse est gardée par des hommes en qui j'ai pleine confiance.
Grandmaster Valette's famous letter to the defenders of Fort St. Elmo is dramatic in its contents, but it showed us there was no other choice.
None of the 53 knights accepts their Grandmaster's offer to retreat. The non-stop bombardment has smashed a large breach in the wall. On the 23rd of June, 1565, a fanatical Ottoman regiment, fueled by hashish, attacks. The first Ottoman wave has been beaten back with heavy losses.
A lot of knights died defending the fort, but on the other side, the Ottomans lost a lot of troops. The final onslaught on the fort was a bloody affair. All the knights and the Maltese knew that the end was near.
Emboldened by their faith, the defenders are willing to die for their God.
Adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua. Sicut in cielo es in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimitta debitas nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostri, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen.
Amen.
Since arriving in Malta as a novice, Raymond has become a true leader of men.
The knights were tired, the Maltese were tired, there was no water, they were hungry. Some of them were so injured that they actually tied themselves to a chair so that they could fight, literally sitting down.
The time has come for Hassan to send in his Janissaries. soldiers break through the Christian lines.
In the last phase of the siege, it was only fighting man against man because there was not space anymore to use muskets and artillery. The last hours was quite an epic fighting, when you have fighting with your daggers and your knives and your swords. Man against man, there was no way to escape. The last hours really was like a butcher scene.
Hassan comes face to face with Raymond for one final showdown.
Siege warfare was always the worst because of the suffering involved, the potential for massive casualties. People get slaughtered.
The survivors are lined up in front of Commander Mustafa Pasha. Hassan tries to save Raymond.
Tanrı'nın askerlerisiniz. Bu sefer merhamet yok.
The Janissaries dispose of the survivors. Hassan is appalled by the senseless waste of life.
From the eyes of a 21st century historian, the atrocities that occurred during the siege were horrible. We know that knights were mutilated, knights were thrown into the sea so they could be drifting towards Birgu and Senglia.
The Pasha's strategic aim was to break the morale of the Christians in the remaining forts. On the other side of the bay, Maria hears a commotion at the seafront. Among the bodies washed up on the shore, she discovers Raymond.
After the floating bodies of the survivors of St. Elmo drifted towards Birgu, Ottoman prisoners were executed by the knights and thrown into the sea as a repercussion of what they had just seen.
After the fall of St. Elmo, the Ottomans begin the final phase of the siege, the destruction of the remaining Christian strongholds. Where once there was camaraderie, there is only emptiness and regret. Conquering St. Elmo proved a Pyrrhic victory for the Sultan. The Ottomans lost 8,000 men. The attritional fighting changed the course of the entire siege. When a Christian relief force landed in Malia on the 7th of September 1565, the demoralized Ottomans hastily retreated, expecting a much larger force to follow.
This was not a land siege, this was a naval siege. If the Ottoman Empire blockaded Malta by sea, no supplies, no troops would come to the Knights and the Maltese, and they would have to surrender. However, the Ottomans did not take their fleet out, and they could not defeat them.
De Valet's attempts to get outside assistance before the siege basically were a failure. But paradoxically, that meant that their victory was absolutely their victory. So they really came out as the heroes of Christendom.
If the Ottoman Empire won the siege of Malta, the soft underbelly of Europe, Italy, would have been exposed to invasion, Sicily would have fallen, Rome would have fallen, and the Islamic Roman Empire that Suleiman the Magnificent always dreamed of would have become a reality.
After the siege, Europe's feuding kingdoms realized that they had to stand together to resist the expanding Muslim empire. In 1571, the Christian fleets united and defeated the Ottomans at Lepanto. The European kingdoms also financed the large-scale fortification of Malta, creating the modern-day capital, Valletta, named after the Grand Master.
The influence of the Knights, even today, is felt. You walk through the streets, practically the beautiful buildings you see are all part of the patrimony that was left by the Knights. We relate to the Order of the Knights of St. John as being part of us. Unlike other colonizers, this was their home, and that's what made a difference, because they invested in their home.
It's fascinating that within 10 years, a boy child have this full transformation from being a Greek child praying in his church. And then he turns into this warrior, killing for God, for the Sultan. And it's not because he has to do it. They do actually believe in all these chivalric and religious notions.
The Siege of Malta epitomizes an important moment of Mediterranean history. People driven by religion, hatred, and fanatism.
Hassan, at the age of 35, returns home to his Greek village. He is now a Bektashi dervish chaplain, attending the recruitment of the next generation. They too will become God's loyal soldiers.